Thanks, everybody. I'll try to speak up. So basically, thank you, Bucky and Doby Books for hosting me here in Houston. I'm really excited to have this book finally be out and available. I have a little visual presentation which will tell you a little bit about how the project came to be and something about the characters in AD and their stories. So let's get started. So I come from a tradition of nonfiction comic books. Some of my influences, who you may know, include Harvey Pekar, who writes American Splendor, which is a long-running autobiographical comic, some fans out there, about his life, his everyday life. And another influence is someone I'm sure everyone's heard of, Art Spiegelman, who wrote and drew Mouse, the story of his father's survival of the Holocaust. Another big influence, Marjane Satrapi, the author of Persepolis, which is her memoir about growing up in Iran during the turmoil of the revolution there. And the largest influence for me has been Joe Sacco, who's a Maltese-born but now American cartoonist, who's like a war correspondent and comic book artist all wrapped up in one. And he's done a number of works of comics journalism about areas of conflict like the Middle East in his book Palestine, and the former Yugoslavia, which this is from in a safe area Garajda. And actually, I'm one of Harvey Pekar's illustrators for American Splendor, which I've been doing for about 15 years. And this is a sample of a recent piece of ours that we did together, where actually you might notice that I'm actually a character in the story down there in the lower right-hand corner. So that was kind of cool. I got to both be in American Splendor and draw American Splendor all in one. So Harvey's influence has been so important to me that it led me to write and draw some stories about my own life, including this book, A Few Perfect Hours, which came out about 5 years ago. And it's about the year and a half that I spent backpacking around the world, traveling in Southeast Asia, living in the Czech Republic, and all the misadventures that my girlfriend and I had during that period. And another collaboration that I did a while back was a collection of true life stories of the business world, documenting the wacky characters of that arena. It was called Titans of Finance, as you can see, and it was written by the current New York Times columnist Rob Walker, who's an old buddy of mine, and is actually also a person who lived down in New Orleans, and I went to visit him down there before the hurricane, and he wrote a great book about living in New Orleans called Letters from New Orleans. Little plug there. So that brings us to late August of 2005, about 4 years ago. I live in New York, and when Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast and New Orleans levees broke and the city flooded, I was at home watching on TV like millions of other people around the country and around the world, and just watching in horror as the events unfolded there, especially in New Orleans, with the people trapped on their roofs and on highway overpasses and stuck at the convention center and the Superdome. So what ended up happening was I took some of that sadness and feeling of helplessness, and I ended up volunteering with the American Red Cross, first with my New York chapter, and then eventually I got trained to be a disaster response worker, and I was deployed down to Biloxi, Mississippi, and I worked down there after about 6 weeks after the hurricane. I ended up down there, and I worked there for about a month, basically just delivering hot food, lunches and dinners to folks who were trying to move back into their homes, which are still being repaired, and they just didn't have the ability to cook for themselves or provide meals, so we were there to help them out. And the main reason I'm telling you that is just to show that my experiences there, even though they were nothing related to people who actually survived the hurricane, gave me some context for what happened later when I came to draw AD, and that I talked to people, I saw what the hurricane had done, and gave me some idea of the project that I was about to embark on. So, and these are just a couple of shots from Biloxi, which I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with. And I did get to visit New Orleans during that time, and that was shortly after the floodwaters had finally receded and before people were let back into the city proper. And this was an image that really struck me of this boat at a gas station. Just one of those random things. And one of the things that really stuck in my mind, obviously, were the water lines that were on all the buildings that were so high off the ground, and just made you think about what it was really like there. And the markings on the sides of the building that were left by the search teams, which had gone through checking to make sure that there were no dead bodies and animals or what have you in there. So, about a year after the hurricane, I was invited to do a comic book treatment of the Katrina story on the storytelling website Smith Magazine. And here's a screenshot of the first when it first appeared. I was, as you can imagine, I was both excited and petrified to tell a story of this sort of epic length in comic book form. And I took about 4 or 5 months just sort of and discussing with the editor of Smith, Larry Smith, thinking about how we wanted to tell this story and, you know, how we wanted to frame it and go about trying to make this into a serialized webcomic. And eventually what we decided to do is we chose to tell the story through the voices of 6 real New Orleanian people who had survived the hurricane. Folks from across the demographic spectrum, and with experiences from everything from those people trapped in the floodwaters or at the convention center, to people who lost everything in the storm, to those who left home and still haven't been able to return, and even one person who was hardly personally affected at all. And again, these were real people who agreed to have their stories told in this comic book form in AD, and allowed me to intrude into every detail of their lives while I was researching the story, and I'm eternally grateful to them. So my first task was to take them from their real selves and turn them into comic book characters. And as you can see, likenesses are not my strong suit, but I feel like I captured some quality of them. So the most important thing to me when I was going forward with the book was just to get to the humanity of my subjects and to show them as more than just victims. So one of the things that we decided to do was to show them before the hurricane, how they dealt with the storm as it hit and during the flooding and the direct aftermath, and where they ended up if they evacuated, and then continue the story forward from there and not just focus it on just the events of the storm. So AD ran online on Smith Magazine until last summer, and then all through last fall I set to work writing new material, revising, and expanding the whole thing for the book edition, which is now out. And altogether there's about 25% new material that's in the book that was not on the web. So let's meet AD's characters. Here's Kwame, who was a high school student and preacher's son from New Orleans East. I read about Kwame in my college alumni magazine. He was a current student there, and they had written a little article about him and his Hurricane Katrina experiences. And Larry Smith, the editor, and I both wanted to have a young person as part of the mix. And since Katrina struck when Kwame was going to be a senior in high school, he was perfect. And he agreed to be part of it. Leo and Michelle. They're 20-something native New Orleanians living in Mid-City, and they were involved in the underground music and publishing scene. And Leo came to me because of a blog that I kept while I was a volunteer with the Red Cross, which sort of got publicized, and a lot of people were reading it. And he heard of me because I was a cartoonist, and he's a huge comic book fan. And he came across my blog and got in touch with me. And he had also kept a blog about his experiences during Katrina, so that combined with his connection with the comics world just made him a natural fit. Then there's Abbas and his friend Darnell, who stay behind to watch over Abbas's family-run supermarket located in Uptown.